The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacey.
Thank you, and welcome to another episode of Voices in Validation, a podcast bringing you timely interviews with industry experts from pharma, biotech, medical devices, and life science manufacturing. Each week, we discuss trending topics and industry best practices. And this week, we are pleased to have with us Karen Ginsbury. She's president and CEO of PCI Pharmaceutical Consulting Israel. Thank you so much for joining us, Karen.
Oh, hi.
I am excited to chat with you today. You've been a guest previously, but I wanted to have you come back today and talk a little bit about some things that are happening in regulatory guidances and global systems. So this episode will be a bit of a what's trending and what's changing kind of episode. And I wanted to kick it off with a couple of questions about quality management systems. QMS systems are used throughout life sciences, as everybody knows, as a GMP method of ensuring that regulatory requirements are met. But there have been some new guidances or draft guidances issued. So, Karen, can you tell us a little bit about what's new, what's going on in QMS right now?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about quality before we even look at GMPs. And then we're going to do a little bit of defining about a quality management system, QMS.
Perfect.
As opposed to a PQS, which is the Pharmaceutical Quality System.
Right.
And why we have to have two different terms. You've really got me going because it's kind of one of my passionate topics. So here we go. So to me, quality, well, it's not me because Philip Crosby said it a long time before me in his famous book, Quality is Free, that quality is meeting requirements. And I would go even further than that, and I would say that quality is meeting all the requirements all the time. And a quality system or a quality management system is about setting up a system to ensure that we meet all the requirements. All the requirements is more than regulatory requirements. Regulatory requirements are only a part of that. We've got environmental, health and safety, and a lot of other things, and a quality management system should address everything. If an employee isn't concerned about their own safety, their own personal safety, how much will they worry about the patient at the end of the line?
Right.
Yeah. So that seems to me to be quite important. So what's new? Well, because of ICH Q10, which is the Pharmaceutical Quality System, that's what it's called, and that was issued in 2008. But in fact, the quality management systems came along a long time before that. Philip Crosby, Deming, Duran, they talked QMS in the 1950s and 1960s with phenomenal success in Japan. So I hardly think we can credit regulators with quality management systems, rather the reverse.
Right.
The GMPs are rather limited. There are a subset of requirements dealing with certain aspects of personnel, facilities, equipment, paperwork, and quality control. They are far from holistic, as was acknowledged at the time in 2008 when ICH Q10 was finalized. I think your question is a really interesting one because maybe when the regulators issued ICH Q10, this is what they had thought about. The GMPs had been around for years, but they didn't do what we all sort of thought that they would, meaning they didn't ensure that regulatory requirements were met. In fact, I worked in industry for around 16 years before I had my light bulb moment. I'd heard people say, not many, but a few visionaries had said GMPs aren't a quality system, and I didn't really understand what they were talking about. And one day I met up with a colleague of mine, and we'd worked together for several years, and we both of us left the company. And he said to me, Karen, you know, the GMPs, they really don't address quality. And I said, I know, they really aren't a quality system. And that was kind of a light bulb moment for both of us, I think. So I'm happy you chose to talk about quality management system, what's new in that, because you're quite right. QMS is a very broad concept, and it certainly didn't evolve in the life sciences industry. It started with Japanese TVs and cars and the aeronautics industry, particularly the latter, where a mistake costs hundreds of lives immediately. Pilots fly on the planes, so they have an interest in seeing to it that no one cuts corners on maintenance, on repairs, on personnel competency. And you'll notice I didn't say training. And it goes on. They don't just do checklists to say someone's trained. If it comes to the 6 months when a pilot needs to redo his proficiency testing, he's grounded until he's done it. So
yeah, right. And so just for the listeners, the GMPs, the good manufacturing practices, are maybe the guidelines, the guidances that have been talked about, things that they may have thought about as a company in terms of their manufacturing practices, as it alludes to, but they're not the actual system that's keeping them on target. That's the checks and balances. Is that what you're
beautiful? Absolutely beautifully put. Yes. And the GMPs aren't preventive. They're, for the most part, reactive. They should be preventive, but they're not sufficiently holistic to achieve that. For example, CAPA, which is or continual improvement, isn't really in the GMPs. You can find references, and regulators, of course, are very good at doing that, but you really have to hunt it down. It's not clear. Whereas if you go to ISO, particularly ISO, the International Standards Organization, 9001:2015, it's a process-driven quality system. And if we map out processes, it doesn't matter whether it's training or cleaning, manufacturing, analytical testing. If you map out a process, then you can do a risk assessment and you can control the high risk elements of it. And you can prevent. That's risk management should be preventive. It shouldn't be reactive.
Exactly. And that's, I think that in this time when we're seeing a lot more automation, digitization within the manufacturing facilities and the research labs, people are revisiting this thought and trying to, it seems to me, or should be trying to really hone their processes to ensure quality, as opposed to just avoiding a letter or
yes, as opposed to
right?
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly right. You think about prevention. I can add on a second signature and be in compliance with the GMPs, but it will not prevent that same error, which is, and I'm using air speech marks, only you can't see them. It won't prevent that same error from happening again. Right. Whereas remove the person, use an automated system to perform that activity, and you scan it and it's automatically documented with an audit trail, cannot be changed without hacking into the system. You have eliminated the risk-inducing factor for the error. That's a quality system.
Exactly. And so, still kind of on this topic of guidances and quality management systems versus GMP, which they're, one is supposedly supporting the other. Are there rules in place for companies in terms of quality management systems, whether they're long-standing pharmaceutical or biomedical companies versus virtual or semi-virtual? Because we hear a lot about biotech and medical device companies starting off as virtual companies or semi-virtual, and it keeps their costs low.
Right.
So those types of virtual companies tend to use a larger number of outsourced vendors for a variety of tasks. And so can you talk a little bit about quality management systems and whose responsibility it is in both of those scenarios, in each of those cases?
I will actually focus on the virtual model. And for those who aren't familiar with the term, a virtual company is a company who holds a manufacturing license or a regulatory application, a new drug application, an investigational new drug application, or an investigational device application. Right. They are the owner of that, but they do not have any manufacturing, testing, or distribution facilities. And this is an operating model which is no longer just a startup concept. It used to be that startup companies, when they were in phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials, or early phase trials, so they would work on that model because it was very costly to set up the manufacturing facilities. But as soon as they approached commercialization, they would set up their own manufacturing factories. But not anymore. Companies are now using this, more and more large companies, as an operating model, where even after commercialization, all production, testing, and distribution is outsourced. Now imagine, I own the licensing application. I am the marketing authorization or the new drug application owner, but I've never seen the product in its final packaging. Well, obviously that's exaggerated, but you get the idea. Right. I have hardly seen it.
So are companies like project managers then? Because they're out.
Yes, precisely. And yet I have 100% responsibility for that product.
It's quality.
But I never really handle it. And I may have, as a CEO, a scientist, or I may have a business person who has no concept of GMP or product liability. Usually, they fully understand product liability.
Right.
They have lawyers, teams of lawyers, to tell them about that.
To advise them on that, right, for sure.
But how well do they understand the production and release process? How well do they understand management responsibilities, which are in ICH Q10, which are in Chapter 1 of the EU GMPs? Both FDA and the European Union are adamant. In the FDA, it's in the Code of Federal Regulations. It's something that people are less familiar with, but in 21 CFR, Part 200, it states quite clearly that where companies use, they call them extramural facilities, but they mean contract manufacturers, and it says so quite clearly, for manufacturing or testing or other GMP, GXP activities. They are ultimately, the FDA considers it an extension of the sponsors or the NDA owners' own facilities.
So even if you are a virtual company, the project manager, so to speak, on this, you are 100% responsible for everything that comes from any of those vendors. Let's think about what
everything means. Let's see what it means about everything. There's that new guidance, isn't there, that you asked about?
Right.
EMA, the European Medicines Agency, on the 14th of January, so just over 1 month ago, we're talking 2020.
Yes.
Issued a draft reflection paper. By the way, our listeners still have a chance to send in comments on that.
Yes.
I believe the deadline is until April. And if you're a virtual company, you may very well want to do that, because you can, by sending in your comments, affect the outcome in the final version. And that's something that is very serious if you are a youngish person working in industry. I'm closer to the retirement end of the scale, so it less impacts me, but I very much believe that we have a responsibility to do it.
Right.
So the guidance that they issued is a draft reflection paper on GMP and marketing authorization, MAH, the marketing authorization holder responsibilities. This draft is 31 pages long. So that's a lot of reflecting.
Certainly.
And they aren't the only ones. PICS, the Pharmaceutical Inspection Cooperation Scheme, 53 regulatory authorities belong to that, including FDA, whole of Europe, Canada, Health Canada, Australia, Japan, Thailand, Israel, most of the world. And the World Health Organization, in recent draft guidances, one on data integrity, one on change management, also emphasize specifically the issues associated with outsourcing and marketing authorization holder responsibilities. Regulators have suddenly realized that what was a small part of pharma's operating model is now a standard way of doing business, and there's inadequate control over it from their point of view.
So we were chatting about what are the actual responsibilities of these virtual companies, and what are the regulatory agencies looking for and expecting?
Right. So the EU draft is highly detail oriented, and we have to ask ourselves, is it needed at all? Chapter 7 of the EU GMPs addresses contract givers, contract acceptors, and what they need to do. And we already know about auditing, about contracts.
Right.
So it seems that the GMPs cover it. However, I'm a consultant, and over the last 10 to 15 years, I've worked for more and more non-manufacturing companies, virtual companies. And I can certainly attest to the fact that there is a lack of subject matter expert knowledge to ensure adequate oversight. And using a contractor as a consultant is like letting the cat watch over the cream. If you ask a professional question, the answer will often be biased by the business side of things rather than pure process and quality GXP need, which is not to say that all CDMOs are cheats. They're not. Most are doing the best possible job under difficult circumstances. But
right, but it seems to me, though, that I understand that they're trying to do the very best that they can, and they've probably hired the very best vendors or outsourced companies, but it seems a little bit like, as you alluded to, the cat watching over the cream, but, you know, they're placing their faith in these vendors that they've chosen, that they're doing the right thing. And it seems like that could go south quickly. Like there's opportunity there in my mind for things to get missed.
I'll tell you that I've seen in the past 2 months when I've done audits at contractors, and we've asked, I'm doing them on behalf of virtual companies, and
Right.
you ask to see raw data from testing, which they have then subsequently subcontracted to another testing laboratory. And they say, we don't have that on site. And I say, okay, who's reviewed it? And they're like, well, we audit the lab. So I'm like, okay, we need to see that data.
Right.
And they can't get it, or it takes a long time. Now, in an inspection, that would be a refusal for FDA if you didn't have that data available.
Right.
When we did review it, we found a lot of questions, a lot of questions. And so I think that it's the contract giver's responsibility to ensure that their needs and requirements are met. But this is really a long story. So I suggest we leave it here for today and come back to a podcast on the virtual model. Anyway, let's give a plug for Validation Week later this year in San Diego, because I think we're going to be doing a virtual validation track, possibly run by me. We'll have mini tracks on master service agreements and quality technical agreements, two-way communication, mutual metrics, data governance, including upfront agreement on which data sets are provided for client review, and what happens if a data set is to be excluded. Virtual validation for process, for analytical methods, cleaning, continued process verification, and so on and so on. It'll be a really fascinating ride, so watch this space.
Yeah, no, and that's an excellent addition to the Validation Week conference, which happens every October. So we'll have, for our listeners, if that's something you're interested in getting more information on, we'll definitely have links in the show notes where you can go get more information about that. But to keep us moving forward, Karen, today, you mentioned briefly PICs. So I've heard buzz about the new draft PICs recommendations on how to demonstrate. So bringing it back to the QMS systems, how to demonstrate the effectiveness of a pharmaceutical PQS system, pharmaceutical quality system. What impact is expected for risk-based change management with this new draft recommendation?
So, yep, PICs are up to their tricks. Another detail-oriented checklist-based document on demonstrating the effectiveness of the PQS, the Pharmaceutical Quality System,
right,
when managing change using quality risk management. It all sounds a bit clumsy. The draft came out at the end of 2019, and it's essentially the work of inspector subgroups from 53 regulatory agencies, and each one has probably given input based on what was bad in their recent inspections.
Sure.
Every point made is valid, but if companies are now going to get busy rewriting their change management procedures to comply, are they going to have time for a holistic approach to the quality management system, or are they going to continue to have a rather piecemeal PQS, Pharmaceutical Quality System?
That's the question.
Right.
For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, how do you see, as a consultant, then, how do you give us some examples about how you see this impacting your clients, for example?
It's great for me because it means a lot of busy work. It means we need to rewrite that change management SOP. So we get in there, we take the draft, and we rewrite it. The question is what comes out of it, because, again, I think you mentioned it when you talked about digitization and automation. We need to get systems in place, and we cannot impose systems on companies who don't understand them because they're so busy filling the check boxes, which are getting more and more. So,
so it seems like
the draft is very clear. There's nothing there you can't do. You just have to do it, and it takes an awful lot of time.
Right.
I'm not sure about the benefits.
And so, we've been talking about smaller companies or virtual companies a little bit in this episode. But there's a lot of other companies who are not virtual, but they're small in nature. They're doing a piece of the work. And so to have to completely go back and put your resources into coming up with a completely updated QRM or PQS or whatever acronym you want to throw in there, it seems like that's going to be detrimental to the financial.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that we have to manage resources. It used to be that GMPs dealt with what to do, but not how to do it.
Right.
However, I don't want to be unfair to the regulators. The regulators have encountered suddenly this horrible problem of companies who, despite the years and years and years of stuff going on, they haven't really come to terms with the quality system. The regulators think, well, I can't say what they think, but I suspect that their approach is, well, if they're not doing it, we're going to tell them how to do it. And it's kind of almost a punishment.
Right.
But the punishment doesn't really work. It's a bit like sending people to prison. You don't make people good by sending them to prison. You usually make them a lot worse. So I think that companies, well, some virtual companies don't even have quality systems. Let's be honest. They just think we're outsourcing. They'll take care of it. We'll rent somebody who will sign off, which is not okay, not by FDA and not by the Europeans.
Right.
But they don't even have really a quality system. And sometimes I come to clients, they want me to come there and they say to me, no, we've got a specific question. And I say to them, but you need a quality system. We don't want a quality system. We didn't get you for that. Either you write this particular SOP or go away. Well, I tend to go away at this point in my career because I'm not interested in that.
Right.
But obviously there'll be other consultants, rightly so, who will just write that SOP. Why not? It's not holistic, but a consultant isn't obligated to. They can tell the client, and then the client chooses what they do.
Sure. And that will probably work for a time, but then those systems won't be integrated. They won't be talking to, they won't flow from one to the other. And at some point,
it will get messy.
Right back in the same boat.
Totally.
Yeah. So, want to talk a little bit about, since we just touched briefly on digitization and technologies coming in to and impacting the processes and the quality systems. Can you give us an idea of the differences in the protocols for QRM systems that are put together for digitally enabled and fully automated labs versus, you know, maybe these other manufacturing facilities that are not quite so advanced?
Wow, that's quite a tough one. The difference between a protocol for QRM, quality risk management, in digitally enabled and fully Pharma 4.0 labs.
Yeah.
Let me say, and I am not, okay, maybe I am dodging the question, but I do want to say that digital and fully automated is the only way forward. So
Yes.
If anyone listening to this is thinking, I'll skip this part of the podcast because it's not for me, we're paper-based. I will predict that within 5 years, there will be no more paper in pharma companies.
Right.
You don't believe me? The paper-based ones will be shut down for data integrity issues. You cannot be DI compliant on paper. I once believed, like many still do, that you could. You cannot. Now for your question. The differences in the protocols,
Yeah.
I guess. A QRM protocol basically asks, what can go wrong? Right? When we do a risk assessment, we're looking at what can go wrong. So what could go wrong for paper is more human-based. It's cheating the system, it's shredding, it's changing numbers, exchanging printouts, which, even if they sound horrific, are basically opportunistic crimes. I am not justifying them. But for automated, Pharma 4.0, what could go wrong is more around cybersecurity and losing data, breakdown of systems, Wi-Fi unreliable. By the way, what's wrong with Bluetooth? It's pretty reliable. So if you don't like Wi-Fi, use Bluetooth.
Right.
The subject matter experts who participate are different. Bring along your teenage kids. Look for geeks. But start asking the questions. You want a better answer? Come to Computer System and IT Validation Week in April. It's April, isn't it, in Philadelphia?
It is April, the end of April in Philadelphia, correct.
So I'll tell you something, Stacey. There is a stellar lineup of speakers. And for once, I will not be there. So I am actually not plugging myself. But it is the best program on the topic that I have seen to date.
I'm really excited about this. I have been brought up to speed on this event as well, and there's a panel, a dozen FDA experts that are going to be there too, with a panel discussion talking about computerized systems and how to manage those in your day-to-day operations as a pharma manufacturing facility. And I for one cannot wait to hear.
And I'll tell you that big data analytics, FDA, EMA, they're already using them.
Right.
They're using them in their inspections, FDA, in their new inspection protocol project. But what worries me is that the people who come to computerized systems and IT, they're computerized system and IT people. And they understand the issues. Where are the operations personnel? Where are the quality personnel? They stay away. They think it's just for IT. It is not. Logistics, labs, operations, quality, R&D, training. There is not a department in the company that doesn't need to get digitized and use big data. So come out of your offices and get to Philadelphia and find out about QRM, quality risk management protocols, for fully digitized and automated processes.
Right. To your point, Karen, that is going to be, I think, more so than any other recent change the introduction of big data technologies and all of the digitization that's is going to impact every single department across the manufacturing company, whether you are already in software and IT, or whether you are on the line manufacturing. You're going to see AI and automation take over, right? If you're quality, you're definitely already dealing with this. So to that point, I understand you saying we are moving that way, but where are we today in terms of these digitally enabled or fully automated labs? If they're that far along,
we are like
of their QRM systems, and what are the expectations, I guess, for those companies different from the regulators than for companies that have not yet attained that type of technology?
You know what? I think that we are so far behind on the learning curve that it's hard even to relate to it. There are a few visionary companies. Unfortunately, it's usually the very large pharma companies who have set up fully automated labs. We heard about it, I think, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, year and a half ago at Lab Week in San Diego. We heard about Gilead Pharma, I think.
Right.
Who were automating. They were about halfway through their journey. But people who don't have visions, they won't be there in another 5 years. But you know, people are scared of it. And you think about the Internet of Things and they say, what is that? But we're all digitally connected. Then they say, well, you know, there's cybersecurity. But, you know, you're being traced right now. If you're using GPS, if you're using Waze, if you're using Google, they know your location at any time of the day or night, or wherever you are. And they'll reset the clock on your phone according to which land you're in. This has been going on for years. So we're all connected to the Internet of Things. So what's to fear? So when my husband retired, he took a Khan Academy online course. And that course uses machine learning and artificial intelligence to tell you how you're doing and to push you questions and to push you coaching. Right. If you took too long to answer a question, even if you got it right, what do? We carry on with GMP quizzes and we say the pass number is 80%. So now imagine that you had 10 questions and one of the questions was, if you have a deviation, you need to A, report it, B, hide it, C, tell your supervisor, and if they say do nothing, right? And you got that one wrong, right? So that's 10%. That's 10% off, but it's okay because the pass rate is 100%, is 80%, and therefore no one comes back and says to you, by the way, you got this one wrong. Now, Khan Academy would say, A, it's wrong. Then they would coach you about it. Then they would ask you another different question to test your understanding. They would see how long it took you to answer. And if your average time for answering based on other students' times is too long, they would know that your understanding is limited and they would not pass you.
Yeah, right.
So if someone thinks I'm in training and this doesn't apply to me, it applies.
It does.
Supply chain, any department at all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we are seeing that that's going to be the case more so going forward. You know, they're just not going to be able to get away from this anymore. Every company is going to have to address it at some point. Karen, though, before I do want to see if we can get an update. Since this is sort of our update episode, I wanted to see, before we end for today, if you had any comments about what's happening with Annex 1. You know, we've heard recently about clean rooms and sterility changes and other things that are directly impacting the pharma manufacturing companies. Can you bring us up to speed on that one?
Yes. Annex 1, we've heard different rumors about it from different stakeholders amongst the inspectorates. But in fact, I believe that the most accurate is what we get out of PICs, because PICs are also involved in Annex 1, even though it's a European guidance. This time it's together with PICS and with the World Health Organization. And what they are telling us is that a second draft will be issued. They say by the end of March 2020. There will be a very short commenting period. They got 6,000 comments on the first draft. There will be a very short commenting period, probably about 3 months. And there will be an even shorter implementation period when the final version comes out, probably towards the end of 2020.
Okay.
So and it will all be similar to the original draft. Certainly the concept of a contamination control strategy and separating operators with rigid barriers from the process, those two concepts came through very, very strongly and will be in the final version. So anybody who hasn't started working on a contamination control strategy needs to do that. I think we have talk of doing that in August at the cleaning conference.
Validation conference, sure.
Yeah.
So who should be most concerned with this change?
Well, it is a European guide, but PICS is also involved.
Sure.
And since FDA is a member of PICS, obviously they will be influenced. PICS has put a very, very strong emphasis on aseptic processing because most of the recalls that we see are coming out of aseptic processes. Advanced therapies, even though they are not obligated to follow Annex 1 in the European Union because they have a separate guidance on advanced therapy medicinal products. Some of the concepts are valid, and there certainly are regulators who apply them. And you try telling a regulator, we don't have to do that. It specifically says we don't have to do that if what they're asking is logical. You can't argue it.
Right.
And you shouldn't argue it.
And you shouldn't, right.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about the quality overall of the products
Exactly.
and following, as we started this episode off with, right? Following the
meeting the requirements.
Right, process that every manufacturing company should have in place.
Correct.
Yeah. Excellent. Karen, I thank you so much for the updates. Before we close, any last words of advice, any, last things you want to point our listeners to for consideration?
Just to keep following what's going on. There is a tremendous amount of new guidance coming out. It's coming at us from all directions. We didn't talk about life cycle management and ICH guidances, continuous manufacturing, and revisions to the analytical methods development, ICHQ 14 that's on the way, and ICHQ 13. So, and the pharmacopoeias and all their updates. It's a tough job, regulatory intelligence. It really is. It's not straightforward at all. But I think that these podcasts are one of the ways of doing it, and IVT's conferences.
Yeah, we are.
PDA. I always say PDA because PDA is always good to get updated. They put out technical reports which can help you. Absolutely. And Google, our old friend Google, the FDA website, the EEMA website, lots and lots of links.
Excellent.
I think IVT Network connects people to a lot of links.
Yes. And we will include many of those in our show notes from today so that folks can go ahead and look at some of the draft guidances and documents that are existing out there in their current form.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Well, Karen, I thank you so much for your time today. I know you're busy and have a day to get on with, but I really, really appreciate your knowledge and you sharing all of your information and your updates with us today. So, a pleasure to have you. Thank you also to our producer, Ed Sullivan, and the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. I also want to give a big shout out to all of you, our valued listeners. Remember, if you like Voices in Validation, we encourage you to subscribe in your podcast player of choice so you never miss an episode, and share with your colleagues and online networks. For more information on the podcast and links from today's show notes, please visit www.ivtnetwork.com. We'll be back again next week with more great interviews. Until then, make it a great week.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.